well-attended panel. This is the panel on AI Unleashed, which sounds like the title to a horror movie. But the full title of the panel is AI Unleashed, Transforming the Future of Communication. Our panel looks a little different as advertised. We were going to have 4 panelists and a different moderator, actually. But we're going to have an excellent discussion today, I think. My name is Ryan Thomas. I'm an associate professor of journalism and media production and the director of graduate studies here at the Murrow College. And I'm the moderator for today's discussion. We have 3 excellent panelists here today to share their expertise on the evolving role of AI in communication, journalism, and also in education. And I'll begin by briefly introducing our panelists. On the end of the panel on the left side is Jill Ballo, who is the Associate General Counsel at Microsoft. Jill leads the legal team that supports Microsoft engineers building many of the company's new AI services that empower organizations to do more in this age of generative AI. Areas of focus include responsible AI, intellectual property, data use and privacy, regulatory compliance, and complex transactions. Prior to joining Microsoft, Jill practiced media and First Amendment and IP law at David Wright Tremaine. Before attending law school, she spent a decade as a news producer at Como TV in Seattle, and she is also a member of the Professional Advisory Board of the Murrow College. In the middle is Ryan Famuliner, who is the Director of Digital News at Cascade PBS. Just flip over, formerly known as Crosscut. He oversees the news and investigative work of the editorial team and serves as story editor for video and podcast projects. Previously, Ryan was an associate professor at the Missouri School of Journalism and the news director of KBIA, a national public radio member station in Columbia, Missouri, which won numerous national Edward R. Murrow, Sigma Delta Chi, ONA Headliner, and PMJA awards under his guidance. He has also done work in podcasting, data journalism, and multi-newsroom collaborative journalism, and worked as a radio statehouse reporter and local TV general assignment reporter and videographer. So welcome to Ryan. Last but not least, closest to me here is Sarah Garrett Vasquez, founder and chief strategist at the Ad Alchemist. The Ad Alchemist distinguishing the agency with a commitment to ethical marketing, the innovative integration of AI, and also a deep appreciation for neurodiversity in creating resonant marketing narratives. The Ad Alchemist sets itself apart by prioritizing authentic, empathetic connections over traditional marketing approaches, championing strategies that reflect the diversity of human experience. Sarah's leadership is marked by a drive to challenge industry norms and advocate for marketing that respects and uplifts, establishing a new standard for impactful communication in the digital age. So welcome to all of our panelists. Thank you for agreeing to share your insights and expertise today. I have some planned questions that I would like to ask. And then I also want to make sure we have time for questions from the audience, because I'm sure you have lots of questions you were thinking about as well. So I will begin with a question, a general question. This is to all panelists, and we can sort of go down the line for this one by asking just generally about how AI is impacting your particular fields in journalism and strategic communication. How is it affecting your day-to-day work? How is it affecting the creative processes in your workplaces? And I think we can start with Sarah, and we'll go down. So.
All right. Hi, thank you for having me here, first of all. I am primarily focused on using ChatGPT, and I use it in my processes literally every day. It's primarily focused around making my life easier in whatever repetitive tasks I have, finding ways to break that down and help me with my neurodiversity, frankly, to be able to get over executive dysfunction struggles. I use it to help me with scheduling as well. I have other AI tools that I've implemented. So pretty much anywhere I can pull in AI tools that already exist. So I use one that's an auto scheduler that helps me with task management. I use one that not only records my Zoom calls, my Google meetings, my online stuff, but it pulls out summaries, notes, action items, and links it back to the timestamp. And then you can send the whole thing to everybody on the team that was on the call. This has saved my life so many times because with bad ADHD, I feel like I can't hold everything in my head. And this has really allowed me to transform my workflows. In my work, I use it a lot with, like I said, customer persona development has been the biggest thing because I'm very focused on making sure that the people that I'm talking to are able to get the message that I'm wanting to send and that they're able to receive it in the way that I am sending it. So to do that, I use AI a lot to understand what the people want to hear about, how to talk to them in their language, and how to do it ethically, because we can't be using deep emotional triggers and not following it up with ethical solutions. Otherwise, we're just creating problems.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Ryan?
Yeah, so just generally in journalism, I think that's part of the question is how it's being used in the industry. I mean, just go Google AI journalism and you'll see that it's like the hot topic of hand wringing at the moment in the journalism world. But it's already here, right? It's already being used in newsrooms in a lot of different ways. I think you think a lot of like ChatGPT or other tools like that that are actually writing text, and that's where a lot of the hand wringing comes in. And that's a less common use so far. A few places have done that. We'll probably talk about those later. I'm assuming some ethical considerations that will come up. But there are other AI tools that are very common already in journalism processes. I don't know. I know there's at least one person here who did anybody used to transcribe audio before Otter existed? Worst part of your job, right? When you had to do that. Otter and transcription tools have completely changed that game, and it's a very tool you can use in a very ethical way that just makes your job so much more sustainable. There wouldn't be as many podcasts today if Otter AI didn't exist, which is maybe not a good thing. There's too many podcasts, but so there's tools like that make your jobs easier that still have some ethical considerations, though, right? Because that text sometimes could end up in a web story somewhere, and it's not reliable in that way, right? So that's really what we're talking about. Is what are these tools in the journalism world that can make your job easier, and where can those be applied appropriately, right? And another example from my career, we did a state government data project in my last newsroom where we wanted to use legislative voting records, and the only place these were kept or made public were in PDF documents on the state House and Senate websites. So we had to develop a PDF scraper, right, that would scrape this off and automatically put it in the data set that populated this site. But that involved multiple systems of checks and balances to make sure that data was reliable sustainably. And every year the data would change on the PDF would change a little bit, so we'd have to redo the scraper or else it would be unreliable, right? So you're only as good as the tools as well, and knowing and understanding those is a big part of being able to use them effectively.
Thank you, Ryan.
Before I talk about how I use AI, first I want to say it's so great to see all the students here. I am a Cougar grad. My parents are Cougar grads. Get this, they met in Regents when my dad was a dishwasher and my mom was a waitress in the cafeteria. Way back then, there were actually waitresses in the cafeteria. So that's how they met. So I learned the fight song when I was in grade school, and my sister and I both ended up going here too. And we're from Seattle, so I spent a lot of time singing the fight song on the grade school playground. So I was a journalist for 10 years. I graduated from Murrow, but now I'm a lawyer, and we can get through that later on the side if somebody wants to ask me about that journey. But basically what I do now is I work at Microsoft, and I am a lawyer for the engineers, for the developers. I don't write sales contracts. I don't go out and do marketing sales. I sit with the engineers, the developers who've taken OpenAI GPT and turned it into, Microsoft products. So like Word, PowerPoint, Excel. We call it a co-pilot because one of the themes you'll hear from all of us is that anytime you use generative AI, the human needs to be the pilot and the AI is the co-pilot. It can't be the one running the show. But two quick examples of what I do in my daily life. Like I'm monitoring my phone, which I'm sure you're not supposed to do in class, because there's a meeting going on right now with my clients. I call the developers my clients. I'm their lawyer, they're my clients. We all sit together in the same building. And there's a very important meeting going on with a very, very senior Microsoft person right now. And I saw a couple chats from my executives wanting to do something that seemed a little sketchy to me, or just something that we would need to look at. So when I'm done here, I'm going to actually go into our Copilot and say, give me a summary of the meeting. Give me like 10 bullet points. I don't want, a whole big long list. So I will be able to figure out pretty quickly like what the main points were and what the action items were. And then I'll go back and ask somebody on my team who was there listening too. But my favorite tool right now is, I don't know if you all use PowerPoint, but my best PowerPoint skills are to put like words on a blank page or a blank, a blank, page slide. I can now, my boss's boss, I have to give him presentations and he likes pictures and he likes color and he likes animation and he likes videos and all that stuff that you're probably learning, in school or at your job. So I can give the PowerPoint like a 1-page bullet point document and say, turn this into a PowerPoint. And in like a couple of minutes, it's a PowerPoint. And then I say, no, add more pictures, put animation here. And within like 15 minutes, I have a fully polished PowerPoint that I just have to edit a little bit. So
maybe I missed it. Are you using ChatGPT for that, or a different platform like Midjourney or something else?
I'm using Microsoft M365, which we have a relationship with OpenAI. So we use as one of our platforms their GPT, and then we add in basically more, I would say, controls. Yeah, but that's what it is with extra stuff.
Thank you, Jill. And so I think what we can hopefully start to discern is that different types of AI have different benefits, different virtues, and some have different vices as well. So I'm hoping we can also then talk about some of the ethics issues that folks have sort of briefly mentioned. This is a question principally for Jill, but also for other panelists as well. And we hear a lot of discussion about the ethical issues that are raised by AI in the different communications industries. And I wonder if you could help us share some of the issues you think are most relevant or pressing, and really kind of help us separate legitimate concerns from scaremongering.
Oh, interesting. That there are so many sub questions in that. Let me set the stage with something that, look, I work for Microsoft now, right? So I'm most familiar with Microsoft's products. I will tell you, our legal department we have more non-lawyers, I believe, than lawyers. We have ethicists, we have government affairs people, we have corporate affairs people, we have public relations, we have the people that like go out and talk to customers and governments and regulators and presidents of countries asking, what do you want and what do you not want? So, but just to set the stage, I do have a Microsoft view, but my job switched about 2 years ago to, hey, the developers aren't developing, what we would consider standard software cloud services anymore. We're going into AI, and it happened before you all probably heard about it, but we have been on a multi-year journey on how do we create responsible AI? How do we not only in our company, but also work with other companies to make sure, that AI is going to be responsible for the world. So what we have done ourselves, we have also gone out and talked to other tech companies about, and other governments, and academia for that matter. The companies that are making AI can't be wholly responsible for how it's used. We can be largely responsible for what the product does, but we need your help too. But we have something called the Responsible AI Standard, and every developer that creates a feature that uses generative AI, and maybe we can define that in a minute, but this is the more powerful AI we're talking about, has to think about, and they are reviewed by multiple people in the company for 6 I would say responsible or ethical AI issues. 1, accountability. Like at Microsoft, we're accountable for what our AI does. We have to understand what it does. Number 2, inclusiveness. We want to make sure that our AI is accessible and benefits everybody, regardless of race, gender, ethnicity, disability, other factors. Number 3, it has to be reliable and it has to be safe. We do months of testing, and I know the other tech companies do as well. So, you can think of this as more than just Microsoft, but months of rigorous testing before something goes out. And then we also monitor after it goes out. Every developer that has a generative AI feature has to do something called an impact assessment. And as part of that assessment, they have to figure out, where could the AI go wrong? What are all the harms that could come up? How can we mitigate those harms before we ever let any of you use the services? Now, that's not perfect. That's something ongoing for all of society to continue to do going forward. Anyway, accountability, inclusiveness, reliability, and safety, fairness. How do we make sure the AI is fair and is not biased? Number 5, transparency. The generative AI we put out, like we have to tell you what it does and why it's making the decisions it does. So we have something called a transparency note. And by the way, there are ex-communications majors at Microsoft that do technical writing, because our transparency notes, if you ask an engineer to write one of those, I mean, they take the first crack at it, but it has to be something in plain English that's readable for everybody. There are technical writing jobs out there that are very, very good jobs at very, very good tech companies that require communications majors. And the last thing is privacy and security. We have to make sure that AI uses data in a way that's compliant with laws, let's say copyright laws, intellectual property laws, and that we tell people when we're using their data, and we tell people when we're not using your data and how you can make sure we're not using your data. So that's it. Accountability, inclusiveness, reliable and safe, fair, transparent, and protection of data.
I might jump in. I just want to flag too that, well, first, Pointer recently recommended last week, Kelly McBride there said that newsrooms, if they don't have one yet, should have like an AI policy,
Yes.
right? A written policy, which is a good idea. And they even have like a template you can use for those newsroom managers that might be out here. I just get mine going as well at my newsroom. But I wanted to flag that those standards you just mentioned really closely mirror SPJ's code of ethics, like the 4 standards. What are they? Anybody know? It's journalism school. What are some of those? Anybody know one or more of those, like the pillars of their codes of ethics? She basically just said them. They are be accountable and transparent. They're seek truth and report it, which is about reliability, really. They're minimize harm, which is one we often forget. And then and the last one is act independently, which is a little different, but it also comes back to the main point. Like it is awesome to hear that Microsoft is putting so much care into these tools, but not everybody's going to, right? But again, you're only going to be as good as the tools, and that's one of the things that is potentially a threat here for a journalism application.
So is that 4th one is basically, we call it human in the loop.
Yeah.
There has to be a human still in the loop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So same. Cool.
Perfect. I want to piggyback on both of those things because everything that they just said, I would say also goes into exactly how I think about things as well. The difference is I don't come from a tech background. I come from like the artistic and the strategy and the communications side of it. So where I know that there are tech companies that are doing all of these things with data privacy and all of that, I'm leaving that to the experts. The areas that I flag for ethical concerns are around the impact on human society. And what I mean by that is exactly things like, one of the points of AI that is so exciting is how accessible it makes so much more to everybody, right? It brings things that previously were unattainable or inaccessible down to a level where the general public feels more like they have a chance. However, that means when you're bringing things like advanced persuasion models and advanced strategic communications concepts down to a level where anybody can use them, and they haven't taken the classes for the ethics things, and they don't know, the frameworks for how to ethically put solutions into place when you're leveraging fear and disgust triggers. You can't just get somebody worked up about something and then be like, now buy our product. Like there's a framework to that, right? Like there's a process. And so that's kind of the thing that scares me, is less the idea of nefarious bad actors and more ignorance. I think that that's actually more likely where we got into trouble with social media and how that we see this mental health crisis around social media. And I think it's because we just moved so fast without having the understanding of the impact that was having on us as a culture and as actual human beings. So that's where I look at things like, I'm taking all of the models and the frameworks that the big guys are using, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to look at transparency, and I'm going to look at all these sorts of things, and authenticity. That's the other big thing, right? Like when you're able to generate content, whether or not it's good content is irrelevant. Like you lose the authentic aspect. And that's where I feel like we need to focus less on generating the content with AI and more on using it to support us to generate that content. And that's, yeah.
Thank you so much. On that, actually, I want to just skip to one of the other questions that I had because it dovetails neatly with the point you just made about how a lot of these issues are not due to sort of nefarious sort of bad actors, but just simply not knowing. And we are in a university environment. So before people even reach the workplace, they will often take classes. And so I'm wondering, very selfishly, as a faculty member who teaches here at the College of Communication, what would you say could be like a top tip in terms of the education about AI that you would offer? If you could boil it down to one top tip, what would each of you offer?
Oh, I made notes on this one.
We'll start with Sarah.
Okay, well, for faculty preparing students, I think emphasizing the necessity of incorporating AI literacy into the curriculum across disciplines and not just on tech-focused things, right? Like it's a tool. It's a tool that you're going to be expected to at least have a base understanding of when you come into the workplace. It's not going away. And bluntly, anybody that is railing against it is just sticking their head in the sand. It's not going away. Pandora's box is opened. Rather than railing against it, we have to find ways to work with it and make it our ally, right? So I think keeping that in mind, my perspective from, and I could be wrong, but just from conversations I've had with some faculty members on both sides of the argument, and I think there is a strong case to be made for, you know, the auto fail for AI versus the teaching how to use it and building assignments around it. And I actually think both are needed. I think just like you wouldn't use a specific research tool or a specific focus group for everything, every campaign, every, you know, messaging situation, you're not going to use AI for everything, but you still have to know how to use that. And I think getting students to think outside the box of generating content, right? Like where can tech exists, right? To help us live our lives better. That is the point of it. So if you can start thinking about it in the ways of what am I doing? Where am I facing a roadblock in my workflows? Where am I facing a roadblock in my processes? If, you know, this is where it's helped me so much as a neurodivergent person. And, you know, I'm sure that there are people in this audience that are neurodivergent and struggle with things like executive dysfunction or overwhelm and task management. And so thinking about how you can encourage students to use AI to overcome those things, to be able to tap into their strengths as opposed to being frozen in that. I think that's the area to go in, and to understand that some classes will need to be focused around having assignments that incorporate the use of them in specific ways and others not. And I think that that should be up to the different faculty members. And a conversation I had yesterday actually gave me a very different perspective that I hadn't considered before, which was for research. I thought, you know, like, well, obviously it should just be fair with research, that shouldn't be counted against you. But it was like, well, the opposing position was, well, no, because then they're just doing somebody else's research and maybe it's not even right, and they need to be able to synthesize these things themselves. And I hadn't considered that at, you know, an academic level, because at my level, I'm like using it to go find that research. Of course, I want to read the research and synthesize these things, or maybe get it to help me synthesize the things, but I already have that foundation. So I think rather than being in one camp or the other as a faculty member, finding ways to build a bridge where maybe, you know, if you're in the opposing camp, you find a faculty member that's in the for AI camp, and you find ways to build curriculum that complements each other. You know, that's kind of what I think there. As far as students, it's just what I said, right? Think about your own roadblocks. Think about what you struggle to do. And just think of AI as your what if machine. That's literally how I think of it. I treat ChatGPT as if it were an assistant. And what that means to me is I still have to have a base understanding of what I want it to do. I still need to be able to tell it, hey, I'm looking to build a customer persona for this profile. Can you please go and find the places that this kind of person shops? You know, like I still need to be able to tell it the job. And then even more so when you just give it something like that, but you don't know what to do with it after that, you're going to get junk responses. You have to know what to do with that information. So the faculty members that are saying, no, they need that foundation are absolutely correct. But to present it in a way where students don't have the opportunity to learn this is absolutely doing them a disservice, and that's not fair.
Thank you, sir. Ryan, what advice would you offer to students and also to educators?
Yeah, just piggybacking for educators, just don't put AI in a box of technology you don't think is necessary for your students to know, right? I think it's easy to do that with new technology, like having been in a journalism school setting too. I remember probably 5 years ago, there were panels like this on 3D and immersive journalism, which didn't end up being quite as disruptive as maybe people thought it would be. AI is going to be a mainstay and it just is, right?
It's not going anywhere.
It's not going anywhere. And so just treat it like you would any other legitimate tool, because these are legitimate tools that you need to equip your students to be prepared to use and do their job better. Because you wouldn't say this about social media, maybe you would have at some point, but you wouldn't say about social media, you could just ignore teaching students how to utilize that professionally, right? It's just like that. It's just a new tool, but one that is going to be a mainstay. The other thing, although it's a little bit different than what we're talking about here, but I just think for students, one thing, and this can be for faculty too, one thing that is going to happen for you in your careers if you go work in newsrooms is you are going to be responsible for identifying content that is generated by AI that may be misinformation or disinformation targeted towards your community or your coverage area, right? So I think there is a little bit of this, like, in addition to the literacy of how you're using these tools, understanding how to identify when content may have been generated in these ways, because you may end up reporting, doing explanatory reporting or correcting reporting about this, especially as you're heading to an election cycle. There was plenty of this happening in the last couple of presidential election cycles as well. It's part of the job. So that's another reason why you just can't ignore being aware of what's happening with AI and how people are using it.
There's a tech cord that was just signed by a bunch of technology companies around the world to figure out, to help with provenance of AI generated content, watermarking, and other ways to figure out whether something has been generated by AI. So that
would be great.
That would be something we should all learn and teach and talk about together.
Yeah.
It's evolving. Okay, I have two quick things for students and teachers. Number one, right now in the early stages of generative AI, find tools that can help you do the easy stuff to boost your productivity so you can spend more time on the creative and the strategic work that's going to require your brain. So boost your productivity that way. Number two, be cautious, possibly even skeptical about a couple things, about the output that you get when you ask ChatGPT or Copilot for Bing or any generative AI search engine for results. Be cautious, be skeptical with what those results say, double check them yourself, and be cautious, professors and students, about any tool you're using and what they're doing with your data. I know people like to just skip right through the privacy statements. I write them. I know that nobody in my family reads them, but if you're going to be putting in, sensitive information, you should probably go read the couple paragraphs to figure out if that is still your information or if somebody is going to use it for their own purposes.
If you're not paying for a tool, that might be happening in ways you don't want.
Yes.
Right? So
If you're not paying for the product, you are the product. That's
Exactly.
kind of what I say. But one more quick thing about, and this I guess goes for everybody, not just students and not just faculty. Pick an AI genre that you want to learn. Maybe it's something very niche, maybe it's something wide. I would say pick the thing that scares you the most and learn that thing. And if you don't know where to start, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I will help you find the creators or the people that are making content about this. There is a wealth of free educational content that other people are putting out on LinkedIn about this kind of stuff, whether you're looking for Midjourney or ChatGPT or anything like that. Now, exactly what Jill said, though, you're going to have to double check this stuff as well, because there are people that are putting things out there and they'll work. But you may get things. I keep coming back to the fear and disgust thing because I literally got into not got into it, but got on my soapbox on LinkedIn, on a top LinkedIn voice, putting out a post that said something about, here you can use this for persuasive communication, but then there's that whole ethical aspect. So just keeping that in mind. But my encouragement to everybody would be, find the thing about AI that scares you the most and go learn it.
Thank you very much. I want to make sure we have time for, there's a few other questions that I might ask, but I also want to make sure we have time for audience questions. So I'll pivot to audience questions, and yeah, let's go here.
Voice cloning. Do you have any ethical limits to your use of AI?
Did we hear the question?
Yeah.
So use of voice quoting was the question. What are the ethical issues, and do we use it?
I have not used it. I think the ethical issues there are kind of in the same way as they are with anything else when it comes to visual assets as well. I think it's a bit more scary to us because when you think about combining the fact that now we've got visual and we've got voice, that's terrifying. I don't know what the future of that looks like. That's beyond my realm of expertise. And I don't know that that's not something that I won't feel pressed to learn at some point. But as of right now, that's not really something that I've delved into beyond just being aware of it.
Again, I think, like I mentioned earlier, Pointer's recommending newsrooms have a policy. So hopefully this would be addressed in a newsroom's policy. I feel pretty safe saying that in my newsroom, this wouldn't be acceptable to be using voice cloning for podcasts we're working on or anything like that. I can't think of an example. I'm blanking on which documentary it was. It was a couple of years ago, there was a documentary where they used voice cloning and had someone who had passed to read an email that they had written, right? Which I thought was not good on multiple fronts, but also there was no transparency to explain that that was what was happening in the documentary. It was instead almost treated like it was a real recording of them reading this email, which never happened, right? And I don't know about you, but like me posthumously reading my emails out loud, it sounds like a true nightmare, right? Like I don't want my emails are not written to be read out loud, definitely not by me after I'm dead. So don't do that. No one has consent to do that. So yeah, I think like, if you're going to do it, you need to have a really good reason and need to be super transparent, because otherwise it's, yeah, hugely problematic.
I think we go here. Yeah, okay, in the red.
So you guys mentioned like the ethics spectrum of using AI. Have you guys established like the ethics of how that would affect the workplace? Like you mentioned that you used it for your scheduling and transcripting and stuff, but as someone who like is trying to get into the business, like Microsoft, and they say currently be doing those things. AI is taking those opportunities away. Like what have you established new jobs for data science?
So just to repeat the question for those who might not have heard it at the back of the room, the question was about the use of AI in the workplace, to the extent it's been used as a displacement for positions, or something that people are being asked to do at the start of their jobs. So anybody can take that one.
Yes, actually, I've created an intern mentorship program for exactly that I'm using to basically just teach people my process. I don't claim to be an expert, but I can teach you what I'm doing and it's working for me. I use this primarily in a startup environment that I work in, and we're in the process of hiring our second round of interns for that right now. So I do absolutely acknowledge that it's taking jobs away, but I think to put my money where my mouth is, so to speak, I'm building everything from a neurodivergent friendly base on communication and establishing suggested operating processes and things like that have worked for me.
And I would say, I just want to remind you all that you're in a really, really, really exciting place here right now, because you're at the very beginning of a new technology trend that will change society, and there will be jobs for you. And think out of the box, because there are going to be jobs in a year that none of us have even thought of. So yes, it's true. I get the question all the time, well, Microsoft's AI or Google's AI is going to take away jobs. We did a workplace study. It's called the Work Trend Index in 31 countries with thousands of leaders, bosses, governments. And everybody said the top reasons to use generative AI were productivity and employee well-being, meaning employees are more satisfied with the jobs they do because they have more time to do what they like. The very last thing that came up in the survey was reducing jobs or headcount. But having said that, right, some jobs are going to change, some jobs will go away, but some new jobs will be created. And I would just encourage you to, look for ways to be prepared for that.
I think, especially in the journalism industry right now, like with all of the hand wringing about AI, this is the biggest boogeyman, right? It's like, it's going to take our jobs. I won't write an article in the future because AI will just do it, right? And I think, sure, that's scary. But I think at least like in the newsroom that I work in, I know the work that we are doing is like very in-depth human-based journalism. Very little of what we're producing could be written by generative AI, at least as it exists now. But there are other applications, like the AP has been using generative AI in some situations to write like box scores for high school sports, right? And that is a good example where these are articles that would not be written otherwise, right? And so I think that's one way to think about it, is like but at the same time, if there's someone who's tasked with creating that generative model to create that. So it actually is creating, a new responsibility, a new role to create new content. So I'd encourage that. I mean, that's a place where this is really the opportunity, right? Is what are the things we can do we couldn't do otherwise? A good example, yesterday, I watched it mainly because I was on this panel. I wouldn't have watched it otherwise, but an MLS game, I think it was the Inter Miami game, they simulcast it using generative AI. The commentators were speaking English, but then there was a Spanish, Portuguese, and French language translation through using AI. And it was labeled clearly as such. And it was, as you would expect, pretty spotty and robotic, but it wouldn't have existed otherwise. At least I don't think. They usually do broadcasts in those languages as well for this MLS team. So it was creating something that didn't exist otherwise. How useful it is, not sure, but it was something new, something added. And that to me was an interesting area of experimentation.
And on the journalism side, Microsoft, so we have something called Copilot for Bing. Bing is our search engine. It competes with Google, which way more people use. But we've been very careful. We have a team of people who have been very careful that if you ask generative AI a question, if you ask Copilot for Bing a question, we share very little of an article's like scope and length. And we very specifically push it out to the news site. Like our job is to help publishers get eyes on those stories.
Thank you. We'll go here.
I have a question. So since AI generated content is being published at a higher rate all the time, do you guys have any concern about AI cannibalism and the fact that it's watering down content, maybe not finding exactly the correct information? And from more of your kind of development side, is there any ways you guys are planning to combat it?
Yes, I worry about that. This maybe dating myself here. I remember when I was in elementary school, you would get a handout and it would have like kind of gray marks on the edges, because your teacher had made a copy of the copy from last year, the copy from last year. Yeah, okay.
I still do this.
A copy of last year, a copy of last year, and the Xerox machine was getting you an imperfect version, right? So you're just getting, as you're saying, further and further away from the truth, which again, one of those standards for journalism, seeking truth and report it. So yeah, if we're relying on this content that was generated by AI that may have these mistakes, this is part of why I was saying identifying it is good. Figuring out how to identify content that may be generated in these ways is going to be a useful skill. Because yeah, if you can see something and say, this doesn't quite look right, then this is a less reliable document, something you're not going to be able to use. Granted, you shouldn't be using other people's reporting. That's the plagiarism thing. But so you're still using it as you're doing research. So yes, I am very worried about this for journalistic processes, because you're going to get further and further away from the truth, which gets you that blurry and blurrier Xerox copy. Sorry for everybody doesn't get them.
It's like a game of telephone.
Yeah, that too.
Different.
Yeah.
We'll go here, please.
So this would probably be chapter 1 in the book AI for Dummies. So I apologize for that up front. As one delves into this, recognizing the importance of being, how difficult is it to train yourself and learn more so that you can recognize?
So this is a question about the learning curve, the difficulty of learning how to figure out these technologies. Anybody would like to take that one?
I don't know how difficult it is. What I know, because I think the tools are still being developed to detect like deep fakes or AI generated content, whether good or bad. I do know that we have in the corporate external legal affairs team that I am, there is a team now that's talking about how do we educate students, academia, and the public to do that. And I was just at a conference with my the president of our company, and he basically said, we're going to have, we, meaning the people that create the tools, not just Microsoft, but the people that create the tools. And I think some of you will probably help with that depending on where you get a job, but like, we can't keep talking in technical terms. Like, we have to talk in really, really simple terms and educate people, you know, in cities, in rural areas, with the government, with universities. So, I mean, there's this huge snowball that seems to be starting. It's not my area, but I see it starting with, like, it better be easy or it's not going to happen. So there is at least a sentiment that quickly everybody needs to be able to pick up one of these tools and use it.
So I think I can do a part B.
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
I'm gonna a moderator and say, as a faculty member, how are you guiding your students? And is it blatantly, you know, fireworks go off in your head when you see something that doesn't quite feel right?
Mhm.
When you know, generated an assignment and work comes in. How is it effective?
That's a great question. I didn't expect to answer, but I will. I think the sort of honest, scholarly, but dull answer is that it depends on what kind of AI we're talking about, right? I think there's a whole range of things, like as Ryan mentioned, the transcription, through to you know, sort of which is on the sort of clearly positive side of the aisle, I think, versus something where it's like outright sort of story creation, and there's a spectrum in between. I would encourage people, I use it when I teach my undergraduate media ethics class, to read Wired Magazine's Code of Ethics, which I think is one of the sort of few really good examples of this. And basically, they talk about, you know, they will use AI as a supplement to journalistic decision making, so there is a human in the loop, versus AI as a replacement for journalistic decision making. And that's the sort of calculation that I'm comfortable with as a faculty member, right? I am very uncomfortable with the idea of training people for jobs that will displace others of my students. That makes me very uneasy. But I'm quite comfortable with the idea of training my students to use tools that will help them do their jobs better, quicker, more efficient, easier, and ultimately be more fulfilling, right, in the workplace as well. So thank you for the question. I want to make sure we have a question from this side of the room. I want to make sure I'm not ignoring anybody. Yeah, at the back there.
So, you know, there are some not so tech savvy. All that to say, we have a election. Who's worried about it?
Absolutely.
You want to answer
Worried.
that
I
first?
think we're all worried about it.
Worried about it. Yeah, I mean, that's like a very obvious example of one that's, but not to everyone, right? And it was just Obama. Paul McCartney wasn't there. Yeah. No,
They don't get that either.
no. So I think it also just comes back to, it's a less extreme version than that, but it comes back to, like, kind of riffing off your question too here in this answer, that like, it comes back to the just basic journalistic process of what's the original source of this material, right? Because that's part of it too. Like this content that got shared on Facebook by someone's mom, like, where did this even come from? Who created it? Why is it there? What's their intention behind this, right? And so this is something we should be doing anyway as journalists on a regular basis, but the stakes are getting higher, and it is going to get less and less easy to identify as these tools get better. When something, like right now, a lot of the images have like 6 fingers or whatever, right? So it's still a little easy on some of the, depending on the medium, but that's going to change. It's going to get better, and it's not going to be that way forever. So no, I mean, I talked about it earlier. I'm definitely very worried about the election, because again, this was present. Like, misinformation, disinformation is a major factor, has been in previous elections, absolutely will be in this election, and these tools. Definitely, we've already seen it. There was the Biden phone call thing where they were discouraging voters, you know, to vote in Biden's voice, right? So there's a lot of stuff that is going to just be unfurled on the public in the next 9 months, and that's just the way it's going to be. This, which is why I went there. I'm like, this is just going to be part of your job as a journalist to explain why Biden. That wasn't really Biden's voice, right? It was generated in this way. So, yeah.
And as the tricks get better, hopefully the detection technology will get better as well. My favor that I would ask all of you, if you're on the journalism side of the house, is help me, like help Microsoft. We have a place for candidates coming up for this election to report deep fakes of themselves, which we will then remove and ban. We also have created standards that help people that are running for office certify the source and the history from media content. So we have ways that we're really doubling down for the election this year. You can find me on LinkedIn as well, and I'm happy to point you in the right direction. But if you hear of deep fakes, if you hear of disinformation, let us know.
Going back to the phone call and the deep fake voice, I think one thing that we can look to a little bit positively from that actually is how quickly it was caught and how very few people really fell for it. It went up the chain pretty quickly and was very clearly and quickly communicated. This was very obviously not President Biden. So while that is not perfect, it does give me some hope that we are moving in the right direction there. As far as social media goes, that is an area I can speak to. That's a bit of my realm of expertise, and especially TikTok. And you'll see now where you're supposed to be marking if you're putting an ad or some sort of static image or anything out there like that. You're supposed to be marking on branded content, whether or not it is AI generated content or whether or not AI is involved. I see that there's starting to be more AI caption option writing help in varying capacities in different places. And I can only assume that the different platforms are using that internally to then begin to get an understanding of how much people are using it, and that will hopefully probably go into maybe some of these flags and regulations and things like that for content that is spreading misinformation or disinformation.
I would also make a plug for media literacy, right, which I don't think is a cure-all by any means. But we think of media literacy in terms of sort of educational programming, but media literacy also functions interpersonally, right, between people who know one another, so loved ones, friends, family who come to you with something that seems a little suspect. We could all, and I have done this myself, rolled my eyes at that, but we could also use that as an opportunity for like a teaching moment, to use the sort of tools that we have to point out why that may be false or suspect or questionable. We have time for one more brief question. I'd like to fit it in, and then one brief question and one brief answer, please. So would somebody care to pose a question? Yes, please. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for asking that. So I will just give you a quick background. Oh, sorry. She asked, how do you represent yourself as neurodiverse, basically, and like when and how do you in applications, when you say applications, do you mean like job applications? Okay, making sure we're not talking about like AI applications. Also relevant, actually, surprisingly. Well, I always make sure that if I am filling out an application, there is the disability clause thing in there. So I always do that. I spent 35 years of my life being undiagnosed, which means I'm very high masking and kind of just thought that this was all personal issues my whole life. And so now that I realize it's not, I've become very vocal about it, especially for other women, because women tend to be the ones that are not diagnosed younger. And that's a whole other discussion. So actually, my first job right after grad school, I had a panic attack in the middle of an interview with an ad agency, and it was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. It was like full blown meltdown of like my face was flushing and I was hot and it was bad. But I just stopped and said, I'm sorry, you know, I'm having a panic attack right now. I'm very nervous. And this kind of gave a brief context of the situation and just said, I'm not representing myself very well right now. Can you just give me a second? And maybe, I can't even remember the question that they had asked me that sent me into this panic attack because it clearly hit on a nerve. But I asked them, you know, instead of me answering that question, I'm not representing myself very well right now. Can we try something a little bit different? Can you tell me maybe something that you're struggling with right now with one of your clients? And I can tell you how I might begin to address that problem. And I literally just turned it around into a way, and I didn't even know I was doing it at the time. But I got hired and ended up, doing well in that job. And I think that that's part of it, is just being human. And, I learned that in the StratCom program as well, is when you can be credible and relatable to somebody, it's going to get you a lot further. So I think just being honestly authentic about it and saying, hey, this is the accommodation I need, and not being afraid to ask for that accommodation. What I have found is that people are more than willing to accommodate you. They just don't really know what you need. So self-awareness and knowing where your struggles are. And I would look at that, like, what do I start to get nervous about before an interview or before I have to go in to talk to somebody, and then just ask for those accommodations.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And thank you to all of our panelists for the advice and for their candor. And thank you for the great questions. Panelists will be around if you want to ask them more, but let's give a round of applause. See you all for the luncheon. Have a great symposium.
I know, it's so weird.